The sound of a gunshot echoed across Whiskey Creek, Arizona territory, as Josephine Taylor pressed her back against the wall of the brothel's upstairs room, clutching the torn lace of her dress with trembling hands. The year was 1879, and for the past 3 years, Josie, as most knew her, had been trapped in a life she never chose, a prisoner in gilded chains at the Scarlet Rose. "I told you, Josie, you're worth too much to me." Maxwell Pierce, the brothel owner, wiped blood from his knuckles as he stood over the unconscious man who had dared to help her attempt an escape. "You try running again, and the next fool who assists you won't be breathing afterward." Josie fought back tears, refusing to give Maxwell the satisfaction of seeing her break. At 22, her once bright dreams of becoming a schoolteacher had been replaced by nightmares of endless nights entertaining the miners, cowboys, and travelers passing through Whiskey Creek. She had arrived in town as an orphan, penniless after her parents died of fever on the journey west. Maxwell had offered her a job as a housekeeper, but that pretense had quickly disappeared. "Clean yourself up," Maxwell said, straightening his silk vest. "You've got customers waiting. And remember, you still owe me $300 before you can even think of leaving." He chuckled, knowing the sum was impossible for her to accumulate with the way he calculated her debts for room and board. 3 days later, Josie sat at her vanity, mechanically applying rouge to her cheeks when Martha, one of the older women, burst into her room. "Josie, you need to come downstairs. There's a man asking for you, specifically a stranger. And honey, he looks like he can afford any price Maxwell sets." Josie sighed, pinning back a strand of her auburn hair. "What difference does it make? Another day, another stranger." "This one's different," Martha insisted, her eyes gleaming with an excitement Josie hadn't seen in years. "He's not like the usual rough types. Carries himself like a gentleman, despite the trail dust." Downstairs, the saloon portion of the Scarlet Rose buzzed with the usual evening crowd. Piano music competed with drunken laughter and the clinking of glasses. Maxwell stood at the bar, deep in conversation with a tall stranger whose back was turned to Josie as she descended the stairs. The man wore a dark Stetson and a well-worn duster that couldn't hide his broad shoulders. As if sensing her presence, he turned, and Josie found herself looking into the most striking pair of blue eyes she had ever seen. They were neither cold nor predatory like those of most men who sought her company, but rather observant and could it be kind. Maxwell spotted her and waved her over impatiently. "Ah, here she is, my finest flower. Josephine, this is Mr. Garrett Foster. He's requested your company for the evening." The stranger Garrett tipped his hat slightly. "Madam," he said simply, his voice deep but gentle. Maxwell was practically salivating. "Mr. Foster here is willing to pay a premium for your time, Josie. Isn't that generous?" Josie forced a practiced smile. "How kind," she murmured, though she felt nothing but the familiar hollow dread in her stomach. "Shall we discuss the particulars of this arrangement in private, Mr. Pierce?" Garrett asked, never taking his eyes off Josie. Maxwell led them to his office, a room Josie had come to fear more than any other in the brothel. It was where punishments were dealt, and where her debt seemed to mysteriously increase whenever she was close to paying it off. "For a woman of Miss Taylor's quality, I normally charge $20 for an evening," Maxwell said, pouring himself a whiskey without offering any to his guests. Garrett remained standing, his posture relaxed but somehow commanding the small space. "I'm not interested in a single evening." Maxwell's eyebrows shot up. "A whole week, then? That would be—" "I want to know her price," Garrett interrupted. "The price of her debt. The amount that would allow her to walk out that door and never return." Josie's breath caught in her throat. Maxwell's face darkened. "She's not for sale in that manner, Mr. Foster. She works here. She has debts to pay. Debts you've manufactured, I imagine, Garrett said evenly. Name your price. Maxwell laughed, a harsh sound that made Josie flinch. You couldn't afford it, Cowboy. She owes me $300. Garrett didn't even blink. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. With deliberate movements, he counted out $300 in bills and gold coins onto Maxwell's desk. There's your $300, he said. Now, is there anything else keeping Miss Taylor here against her will? Maxwell stared at the money, momentarily speechless. Josie couldn't believe what was happening. Was this a cruel joke? Men had offered to save her before, only to expect her to become their personal property instead. Finding his voice, Maxwell narrowed his eyes. 400. She's damaged property I've had to repair and train. 400 is my final offer. Without hesitation, Garrett added another $100 to the pile. I believe our business is concluded. Maxwell's eyes darted between the money and Josie, calculation and greed warring in his expression. Finally, he swept the cash into his desk drawer. Take her, he spat. She was becoming more trouble than she was worth anyway. Garrett turned to Josie, his expression softening. Miss Taylor, you're free now. If you wish, you can come with me. If not, this money buys your freedom to go wherever you choose. Josie stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Freedom. After 3 years of being told she would never leave, she looked at Garrett, searching for the catch, the hidden motive behind his generosity. Why? She whispered. Not here, he replied quietly. Get your things if you want them. I'll wait for you outside. 15 minutes later, with her meager possessions packed in a small carpet bag, Josie stepped out onto the boardwalk where Garrett waited with 2 horses. The night air felt different, somehow fresher, full of possibility. You didn't answer my question, she said, clutching her bag tightly. Why would you do this for a stranger? Garrett helped secure her bag to the saddle of the second horse, a gentle mare with a white star on her forehead. I've been tracking Maxwell Pierce for 6 months, he explained. He's wanted for fraud and kidnapping in 3 territories. You're not the first woman he's trapped with false debts. You're a lawman, Josie asked, suddenly wary. No, Garrett said. Just a man settling a debt of my own. Something in his tone told her there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. Where will we go? She asked, realizing she had nowhere to turn. I have a small ranch about 2 days' ride from here. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do next. He held the mare steady as Josie mounted. Unless you'd prefer I take you somewhere else. Josie looked back at the Scarlet Rose, the building that had been her prison for 3 long years. In the window, she caught sight of Maxwell watching them, his face contorted with rage. Your ranch sounds fine, Mr. Foster, she said, turning away from her past. I don't have anywhere else to go. As they rode out of Whiskey Creek under a canopy of stars, Josie felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. She didn't know this man or what awaited her, but for the first time in a long time, she had a choice in her future. They traveled through the night, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Garrett was quiet but attentive, making sure Josie was comfortable and had enough water. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Whiskey Creek. We should rest here for a few hours, Garrett said, gesturing to a small grove of cottonwood trees near a creek. It's not safe to stay in one place too long until we're well out of Pierce's territory. You think he'll come after us? Josie asked, dismounting stiffly. She wasn't used to riding for such long stretches. He's a man who doesn't like losing what he considers his property, Garrett replied, helping her down. His hands were strong but gentle on her waist, and he released her immediately once her feet touched the ground. And he's not fond of me for personal reasons. While Garrett tended to the horses, Josie sat by the creek, washing trail dust from her face. The cool water was refreshing, and she took a moment to study her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different, already less haunted, perhaps. "Are you hungry?" Garrett asked, approaching with a small bundle of provisions. Josie nodded, accepting the jerky and hardtack he offered. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the food. They ate in silence for a while before Josie gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "How do you know Maxwell? You said it was personal." Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He took something from me too," he said finally. "My sister Caroline. She was 19 when she fell for his charm in Santa Fe. By the time I tracked them to Denver, she had died of fever, at least that's what he claimed. The local doctor told me differently." Josie's heart ached for him and for the sister she'd never know. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The authorities wouldn't touch him. He had too many friends in high places. So I've been following him, gathering evidence, helping the women he traps when I can." Garrett's eyes met hers. "You're the seventh I've helped free." "What happens to them, the others?" Josie asked. "Most had family to return to. 2 found honest work in respectable establishments. 1 married a rancher outside of Tucson." He paused. "What about you, Miss Taylor? Is there family waiting somewhere?" Josie shook her head. "My parents died on the trail west. I was 18, alone with no skills except my education. I thought I could find work as a teacher." She laughed bitterly. "Maxwell promised me a job as a housekeeper while I looked for a teaching position." Garrett nodded, understanding without her having to explain how Maxwell's false promises had ensnared her. "You still could be a teacher," he said. "Your circumstances don't define who you are or who you can become." His words touched something deep inside her, a part of herself she had locked away for survival. "I haven't thought about the future in a long time," she admitted. "Just getting through each day was enough." "You can stay at my place as long as you need," Garrett assured her. "It's nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. No one will bother you there." After a few hours of rest, they continued their journey. As they rode, Josie began to notice the subtle changes in the landscape, the way the desert gave way to grasslands, how the mountains in the distance became more defined. She also began to notice things about her rescuer. The way he scanned their surroundings constantly, his quiet competence with the horses, how he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger. By nightfall, they had reached a small trading post where Garrett secured them separate rooms for the night. Before retiring, he purchased a simple dress and some necessities for Josie, handing them to her without ceremony. "You might want something different to wear," he said, his eyes carefully averted from the revealing dress she still wore from the brothel. "For comfort on the trail." Josie accepted the bundle gratefully. The plain calico dress represented more than just clothing. It was another step toward reclaiming her dignity. In the privacy of her small room, Josie changed into the new dress, surprised at how emotional the simple act made her feel. She ran her fingers over the modest neckline, the practical cotton fabric so different from the gaudy silks and satins Maxwell had required her to wear. The next morning, Garrett barely concealed his appreciation when she emerged in her new attire, her hair simply braided down her back. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "Are you ready to continue?" Josie nodded, feeling a warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the rising sun. For the first time in years, a man's gaze made her feel seen rather than evaluated. The second day of travel was easier than the first. Josie found herself opening up more, sharing stories of her childhood in Missouri, her dreams of teaching. Garrett was a good listener, offering small insights into his own life, in return how he'd worked cattle drives before saving enough to buy his small spread, his love of horses, his habit of reading poetry on winter nights. Poetry? Josie couldn't hide her surprise. You don't strike me as the poetic type, Mr. Foster. His mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. My mother was a schoolteacher. She believed education shouldn't end just because we lived on the frontier. He glanced at her. And please call me Garrett. Only if you'll call me Josie, she replied. As the sun began to set on their second day of travel, Garrett pointed to a distant ridge. Just over that rise. We'll be home before dark. Home. The word felt strange to Josie. She hadn't had a real home since leaving Missouri. Garrett's ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a sturdy log cabin with a wide porch, a barn, a corral for the horses, and various outbuildings. Beyond the immediate homestead stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. The whole scene was framed by a backdrop of pine-covered mountains that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. It's beautiful, Josie breathed as they approached. It's quiet, Garrett replied. Sometimes too quiet, but it's mine, free and clear. He helped her dismount in front of the cabin. I hope you'll be comfortable here. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area with a stone fireplace at one end. 2 doors led off to what Josie assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was practical, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair near the fire, shelves lined with books that confirmed Garrett's reading habits. You'll take my room, Garrett said, opening one of the doors to reveal a neatly kept bedroom with a hand-carved bed frame and quilt. I'll use the extra bunk in the foreman's cabin. I couldn't put you out of your own home, Josie protested. It's no trouble, he insisted. Ramon, my foreman, won't mind the company. True to his word, Ramon Alvarez appeared shortly after their arrival, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and kind eyes who greeted Josie with respectful courtesy and no questions about her presence. He helped Garrett stable the horses while Josie settled into her new temporary home. That night, after a simple meal that Ramon prepared, Josie sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. Garrett joined her, keeping a respectful distance as he leaned against the porch railing. Thank you, Josie said softly, for all of this. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. There's nothing to repay, Garrett replied. Your freedom wasn't mine to give or take, it was always yours. Maxwell Pierce was the thief. Still, $400 is a lot of money. Garrett was quiet for a moment. The money means nothing compared to giving someone their life back. He looked out at the darkening landscape. I couldn't save Caroline, but maybe helping others like her balances the scales somehow. In that moment, Josie understood that her freedom had given Garrett something to a measure of peace, perhaps, or the sense that his sister's death hadn't been entirely in vain. The next morning, Josie woke to the sounds of ranch life, the distant lowing of cattle, the neighing of horses, men's voices calling to each other as they began their day's work. For a moment, she forgot where she was, panic rising in her throat at the thought of another day at the Scarlet Rose. Then reality rushed in. She was free, safe in Garrett Foster's home. She dressed in her new calico dress and ventured out to find Garrett and Ramon talking over coffee at the kitchen table. Good morning, Garrett said, rising when she entered. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in years, Josie admitted. I hope I haven't slept too late. No such thing here, Ramon said with a warm smile. Coffee over breakfast, Garrett explained the routine of the ranch. Ramon and I, along with 2 hands who live in the bunkhouse down the way, manage about 300 head of cattle. It's not a big operation, but it's enough. What can I do to help? Josie asked, eager to be useful. Garrett looked surprised. You don't have to work, Josie. You're a guest here. I've never been one to sit idle, she said firmly. and I'd rather contribute than feel like charity. A look of respect crossed Garrett's face. All right, there's plenty to do if you're sure. The garden needs tending, and I'm afraid the house hasn't had a woman's touch in, well, ever. Ramon chuckled. What the patron means is that we live like bachelors and could use someone to remind us that plates should be washed and floors swept occasionally. Josie smiled, grateful for the lightness Ramon brought to the conversation. I can certainly handle that. The days quickly fell into a comfortable routine. Josie took charge of the house and garden, finding unexpected joy in the simple tasks of cooking, cleaning, and watching green things grow under her care. Garrett and his men worked from dawn until dusk with the cattle and horses, maintaining fences and all the other endless chores of ranch life. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Josie learned that Garrett was 30 years old, had fought briefly in the war between the states as a very young man, and had worked his way west afterward, saving every penny until he could buy his ranch 5 years ago. What will you do now? Josie asked one evening about 2 weeks after her arrival. Now that you've freed me from Maxwell, will you keep tracking him? Garrett considered the question, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to see him brought to justice. Another part, Josie prompted when he fell silent. Another part wonders if it's time to let the dead rest and focus on the living. His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the horizon. The air between them seemed to change, charged with something Josie wasn't ready to name. She had spent 3 years learning to guard her heart, to separate her true self from the role she was forced to play. Feelings, real feelings, were dangerous. A month passed, and Josie flourished in her new freedom. The haunted look in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. She put on a little weight, her previously too thin frame filling out healthily with regular meals and fresh air. She began riding again, exploring the ranch on the gentle mare Garrett had assigned for her use. One afternoon, Josie rode out to where Garrett and Ramon were mending a fence line. She brought them fresh water and some of the biscuits she had baked that morning. As she approached, she saw Garrett lift a heavy post into place, the muscles in his arms and back evident through his sweat-soaked shirt. He looked up as she neared, and the smile that transformed his usually serious face made her heart skip. "Thought you two might be thirsty," she called, dismounting and carrying the bundle toward them. "You're an angel, Miss Josie," Ramon declared, accepting water and biscuits gratefully. Garrett drank deeply, watching her over the rim of the cup. "Thank you," he said simply when he finished. "This is a welcome break." "It looks like hard work," Josie observed, surveying the fence line they were repairing. "Necessary work," Garrett replied. "A ranch is only as good as its fences." Ramon, sensing something in the air between them, suddenly remembered tasks elsewhere. "I should check on that section we fixed yesterday," he said, mounting his horse with a knowing smile. "Don't want to find out later that we missed something." Left alone, Josie and Garrett fell into an awkward silence, both aware of the growing connection between them but unsure how to navigate it given her past. "How are you settling in?" Garrett finally asked, setting down his tools and giving her his full attention. "Well," Josie said. "Better than I could have imagined, actually." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what comes next." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, concern, perhaps, or disappointment. "You're thinking of leaving?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "I mean, not unless you want me to. I just meant I've been thinking about the future. About teaching again, maybe." Relief visibly washed over him. "There's a small school in Hartville, about 10 miles from here. They've been looking for a teacher since Mrs. Parker retired last spring. Do you think they would consider someone like me? Josie asked, the old doubts creeping in. Garrett stepped closer, his eyes serious. Josie, your past doesn't define you. You're educated, intelligent, and have more strength than anyone I've ever met. Any school would be fortunate to have you. His faith in her brought tears to her eyes. Thank you for believing in me. Always, he said softly, and for a moment Josie thought he might reach for her. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. I could take you into town next week if you'd like to inquire about the position. Josie nodded, both disappointed and relieved at the distance he maintained. I'd like that. The town of Hartville proved to be a pleasant surprise, a growing community with a general store, church, small hotel, and other businesses that spoke of stability and permanence. The school was a neat white building at the edge of town, currently empty for the summer months. Mr. Henderson, the head of the school board, met with Josie in his office above the general store. Garrett waited outside, giving her privacy but remaining close enough should she need support. Your credentials are impressive, Miss Taylor, Mr. Henderson said, reviewing the letter of recommendation Josie had miraculously managed to keep during her ordeal. It was from her former teacher in Missouri, attesting to Josie's aptitude and character. And we are in desperate need of a teacher for the fall term. I would be dedicated to the students, Josie promised. Education has always been my passion. Mr. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. There is the matter of your situation. A teacher must be above reproach in her personal conduct. Josie's heart sank. Of course, her past would be an obstacle. Even if Mr. Henderson didn't know the specifics, an unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch would raise eyebrows. Miss Taylor's reputation is impeccable, came Garrett's voice from the doorway. He had apparently been listening. She is currently my guest, staying in my home while I reside in the foreman's quarters. My sister will be joining us next month as a companion for Miss Taylor, ensuring all propriety is maintained. Josie stared at him in surprise. He had never mentioned a sister coming to visit. Mr. Henderson seemed satisfied with this explanation. In that case, the board will meet next week to make a formal decision, but I see no reason why you shouldn't be offered the position, Miss Taylor. The term begins in September. Outside, as they walked toward the horses, Josie confronted Garrett. You don't have a sister, she said quietly. Caroline died. Garrett had the grace to look slightly abashed. I have a cousin in Denver who's been wanting to visit. Eleanor is a respectable widow who would happily play the role if it means helping you secure the position. He met her eyes. I should have discussed it with you first. I apologize for speaking out of turn. No, I thank you, Josie said, touched by his quick thinking and willingness to help. That's very kind of you to arrange. So you'll stay? Garrett asked, a vulnerability in his voice she hadn't heard before. At least until school starts. Yes, Josie said, a warmth spreading through her chest. I'll stay. The ride back to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation about the town, the school, and Josie's ideas for teaching. When they arrived home, Ramon greeted them with news that a young steer had gotten itself stuck in mud down by the creek, requiring all hands to help free it. Josie watched from a safe distance as Garrett, Ramon, and the two other ranch hands Lewis and Thomas worked together to extract the frightened animal. Garrett was in his element, calm and authoritative, his strength evident as he helped pull the steer to solid ground. When the job was done, all four men were covered in mud but triumphant. Josie couldn't help but laugh at the sight. Find something amusing, Miss Taylor? Garrett asked, a rare teasing note in his voice as he approached her. Not at all, Mr. Foster, she replied innocently. I was just thinking how distinguished you all look in your new attire. A mischievous gleam appeared in Garrett's eyes. Before Josie could react, he had scooped up a small handful of mud and dabbed it lightly on the tip of her nose. "Now you match," he said, his face breaking into the first full smile she had seen from him. Josie gasped in mock outrage, then burst into laughter. The other men joined in, the tension of the rescue giving way to much-needed levity. Later that evening, after everyone had cleaned up and eaten, Josie found Garrett on the porch, looking at the stars. "I want to thank you again," she said, joining him at the railing, "for everything you've done freeing me, giving me a place to stay, helping me with the teaching position." "You don't need to keep thanking me, Josie," Garrett said gently. "Seeing you reclaim your life is thanks enough." She studied his profile in the moonlight, struck by how handsome he was when his features were relaxed. "You've given me back more than my freedom," she said softly. "You've given me hope." Garrett turned to face her, his expression serious. "You gave yourself hope, Josie. All I did was remove an obstacle." "Either way," she murmured, "I'm grateful our paths crossed." Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth that made her breath catch. "So am I," he replied, his voice low. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then, with visible restraint, Garrett stepped back. "Good night, Josie," he said. "Sleep well." As promised, Garrett's cousin Alina arrived the following month. She was a pleasant woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately endeared her to Josie. With Alina's presence, the last obstacle to Josie's teaching position was removed, and Mr. Henderson officially offered her the job. Summer began to wane, the days growing shorter as September approached. Josie divided her time between preparing lessons for her future students and helping around the ranch. She and Alina got along well, sharing the household duties and becoming friends in the process. "My cousin is quite taken with you," Alina remarked one afternoon as they picked vegetables from the garden. "I haven't seen him this at peace since before Caroline died." Josie blushed, focusing intently on a tomato plant. "He's been very kind to me," Alina chuckled. "Garrett Foster has been many things in his life, but kind isn't a word most would use. Honorable, yes. Determined, absolutely. But he reserves his kindness for very few." "He saved my life," Josie said simply. "And you may have saved his," Alina replied, her expression softening. "Vengeance is a hollow pursuit, Josie. It was consuming him. Since bringing you here, he's talked about the future again." Josie didn't know how to respond to that, but Alina's words stayed with her, adding new dimensions to her understanding of the quiet, complex man who had rescued her. The evening before Josie was to begin teaching, Garrett suggested they ride to a special spot on the ranch. "A place I go to think," he explained. "I'd like to show it to you before your new life begins." They rode for about half an hour, climbing a gentle slope until they reached a small plateau overlooking the entire valley. The ranch looked like a miniature village from this height, nestled among the grasslands and distant forests. The setting sun painted everything in gold and amber. "It's breathtaking," Josie said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the overlook. "I come here when I need perspective," Garrett said, joining her. "When problems seem too large down below, I ride up here and remember how small they really are in the grand scheme of things." Josie understood perfectly. "Thank you for sharing this with me." They stood in silence for a while, watching the light change as the sun sank lower. Finally, Garrett turned to her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Josie, tomorrow you begin your new life as a teacher. You'll be independent, respected, building the future you always wanted." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I want you to know that nothing changes for us. Your room at the ranch will always be yours for as long as you want it." "Thank you," Josie said, touched by his assurance. "I've come to think of it as home." Garrett's eyes softened. "I've come to think of you as—" He trailed off, then took a breath. "Josie, I need to say something, but I want you to know that you owe me nothing. Your freedom is unconditional with no strings or obligations." Josie's heart began to race. "I know that, Garrett." "Good." He ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically nervous. "Because I find myself thinking about you in ways that have nothing to do with obligation or duty or even friendship." The air between them seemed to still. "What ways?" Josie asked, barely above a whisper. "In ways a man thinks about a woman he admires deeply, a woman he respects, a woman he met her eyes directly, a woman he's falling in love with." Josie felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For 3 years, she had protected herself from feeling anything real for any man. She had built walls around her heart that she thought would never come down. Yet somehow, this quiet, honorable man had found his way past her defenses. "I don't expect anything from you," Garrett continued when she didn't speak. "I just wanted you to know, and to assure you that my feelings won't change how I treat you or the promises I've made." "Garrett," Josie finally said, finding her voice. "After what happened to me, I thought I'd never trust a man again. I thought that part of me was dead." She took a step closer to him. "But you've shown me that good men still exist, men who keep their word, who respect women as people, not possessions." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Josie, I need time," she said gently. "Time to be sure that what I feel is real and not just gratitude. Can you understand that?" Relief washed over his features. "Of course. Time is something we have plenty of." The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable, a new understanding between them that required no words. At the stable, Garrett helped Josie dismount, his hands lingering slightly at her waist before he stepped back respectfully. "Good night, Josie," he said, "and good luck tomorrow. Those children are fortunate to have you as their teacher." "Good night, Garrett," she replied, impulsively rising on her tiptoes to place a soft kiss on his cheek. "Thank you for showing me your special place." The surprise and pleasure in his eyes stayed with her as she walked back to the house. Josie's first day of teaching was everything she had dreamed of and more. The schoolhouse was filled with 28 children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, all eager, or at least present, to learn. Some were from town, others from surrounding ranches and farms. They regarded their new teacher with curiosity and varying degrees of respect. By the end of that first week, Josie had established herself as firm but fair, earning the children's trust and cooperation. The work was challenging but fulfilling in ways that made her heart sing. Each evening, she would return to the ranch exhausted but happy, sharing stories of her day with Garrett, Alina, and Ramon over dinner. As autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular colors to the landscape, Josie found herself settling into a rhythm that felt right. She taught during the week, helped around the ranch on weekends, and gradually allowed herself to explore her feelings for Garrett. For his part, Garrett was true to his word, treating her with the same respect and consideration as always. But she noticed the small changes, how his eyes would follow her across a room, how he would find reasons to be near her, the way his smile came more easily now. One Saturday, in late October, Josie was hanging laundry when a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Something in the urgency of the horse's pace made her pause, watching as the man, a stranger, reined to a stop in front of the house. Garrett emerged from the barn, walking quickly to meet the visitor. Josie couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Garrett's posture stiffen. After a brief exchange, the stranger handed Garrett what looked like a telegram, then rode away almost as quickly as he had arrived. Concern gnawed at Josie as she watched Garrett read the paper, his expression growing darker by the second. When he looked up and saw her watching, something in his eyes made her stomach clench with apprehension. She abandoned the laundry and walked toward him. "What is it? What's wrong?" Garrett's jaw was tight, his eyes hard in a way she hadn't seen since the night he freed her from Maxwell Pierce. "Maxwell has been seen in Hartville," he said, his voice dangerously controlled. "Apparently, he's asking questions about a former employee who now teaches at the local school." Cold fear washed over Josie. "How did he find me?" "It doesn't matter. He won't get near you." Garrett's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip. "I'm going to find Ramon and the others. Stay in the house with Alina until I return." "Garrett," Josie began, but he was already striding toward the corral, purpose in every step. Alina, who had witnessed the exchange from the porch, came to Josie's side. "Come inside, dear," she said gently but firmly. "Let Garrett handle this." Inside, Josie paced the floor while Alina calmly loaded a shotgun. "My late husband taught me to use this," she explained when Josie looked surprised. "A woman alone needs to protect herself." Hours passed with no word. As the sun began to set, Josie's anxiety reached a breaking point. "I can't just sit here," she declared. "I'm going to town." "Absolutely not," Alina said firmly. "Garrett would never forgive me if I let you put yourself in danger." "But what if he's in danger?" Josie countered. "What if Maxwell has set a trap?" Before Alina could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Rushing to the window, Josie saw Garrett dismounting, followed by Ramon and the sheriff from Hartville. Josie threw open the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of Garrett unharmed. "What happened?" she asked as they entered. "Pierce was in town, all right," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "But he's gone now. Checked out of the hotel right after Mr. Foster and I had a talk with him." "A talk," Josie repeated, looking at Garrett's knuckles, which showed signs of recent contact with something harder than air. "He's been warned to stay away from you and this town," Garrett said, his voice still tight with anger. "The sheriff here has agreed to keep an eye out in case he returns. I'll have my deputies make regular rounds by the school," the sheriff assured her. "And Mr. Foster has arranged for Ramon to escort you to and from town each day until we're sure Pierce has moved on." After the sheriff left, promising to send word if Maxwell was spotted again, Josie confronted Garrett privately. "You shouldn't have confronted him," she said, worry making her voice sharper than intended. "He's dangerous." "So am I," Garrett replied simply. "When it comes to protecting those I care about." The intensity in his eyes made Josie's breath catch. "What exactly did you say to him?" Garrett's expression hardened. "I told him that if he came near you again, I would kill him, and I meant it." "Garrett, no." Josie gripped his arm. "I don't want you becoming a killer because of me. He's not worth it." "You are," Garrett said softly, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something warmer. "But you're right. He's not worth compromising what I believe in." He covered her hand with his. "I won't seek him out, Josie, but I will protect you if he forces my hand." Josie nodded, understanding the distinction. "Do you think he'll come back?" "Men like Maxwell don't like to lose," Garrett said honestly. "But he's also a coward at heart. He may decide you're not worth the trouble." For the next 2 weeks, Ramon accompanied Josie to and from school each day. The children noticed the armed escort but seemed to find it more exciting than concerning. To them, it was like something from a dime novel, their teacher being protected by a real cowboy. Slowly, as no sign of Maxwell appeared, the tension began to ease. The sheriff reported that inquiries in neighboring towns suggested Pierce had moved on, perhaps to California. Ramon continued to escort Josie, but the atmosphere of immediate threat dissipated. One evening in mid-November, Josie sat by the fire in the main room, grading papers while Garrett read nearby. Alina had retired early, leaving them alone in comfortable silence. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling gently, casting a hushed spell over the ranch. Thanksgiving is next week, Josie remarked, setting aside a completed assignment. The children are more interested in the holiday than in their multiplication tables. Garrett smiled, closing his book. Can't say I blame them. Alina's already planning a feast that would feed half the county. She mentioned inviting some of the neighbors, Josie said. It will be nice to have a proper celebration. Garrett studied her face in the firelight. Are you happy here, Josie? With your teaching, with all of this? Josie met his gaze steadily. Happier than I ever thought I could be again, she answered truthfully. You've given me back my life, Garrett, not just by freeing me from Maxwell, but by believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. You did the hard part, he said. I just opened a door. You walked through it on your own strength. Josie set aside her papers and moved to sit beside him on the small sofa. The time you promised me, she said quietly. I've taken it, to sort through my feelings to be sure they're real. Garrett went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. And I've realized something, Josie continued, her heart pounding but her voice steady. What I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. It's deeper than that, stronger. Hope dawned in his eyes, but he remained cautious. Josie, I love you, Garrett, she said simply. Not because you rescued me, but because of the man you are. Honorable, kind, patient. A man who sees me the real me and values what he sees. For a moment, Garrett seemed unable to speak. Then, with infinite gentleness, he took her hand in his. I've loved you since that day at the creek when you laughed at me covered in mud, he admitted. You were so alive in that moment, so free of the shadows that had followed you. I knew then that I wanted to spend my life seeing you laugh like that. Josie's eyes filled with tears of happiness. Then I suppose we have a lot of muddy creeks in our future. With tender deliberation, Garrett raised his hand to cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Josephine Taylor? In answer, Josie leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet sure, respectful yet full of promise. It was nothing like the mechanical kisses she had endured in her past. This was a communion of equals, a beginning rather than a transaction. When they parted, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, he said. If you'll allow it. Josie smiled, her heart fuller than she had ever known possible. I would like that very much. Their courtship progressed through the winter months, following the traditions and proprieties that both respected. Garrett would take Josie on proper outings, sleigh rides through the snow-covered countryside, dinners in town, church socials where they danced together under the approving eyes of the community. Alina remained as chaperone at the ranch, though her knowing smiles suggested she found the formality somewhat amusing. You two are the most proper couple I've ever encountered, she teased one evening after Garrett had respectfully kissed Josie's hand at the door to her room. It's refreshing, if slightly old-fashioned. We have our reasons, Josie replied, thinking of all the times in her past when choice had been taken from her. This slow, deliberate courtship was healing in ways she hadn't anticipated, allowing her to reclaim intimacy on her own terms. By spring, their relationship had deepened into a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. The school term was coming to an end, and Josie had been offered a contract for the following year, which she happily accepted. On a perfect May evening, Garrett took Josie back to their special overlook, now lush with spring wildflowers. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in soft golden light, he turned to her with uncharacteristic nervousness. Josie, he began, taking both her hands in his. When I found you in that brothel, I was a man consumed by the past, by grief and anger. You changed that. You showed me that life goes on, that healing is possible. Josie squeezed his hands encouragingly, her heart racing with anticipation. I know your past holds pain, Garrett continued. Mine does too, but I believe our futures could hold something beautiful if we face them together. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee, he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. Josephine Taylor, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy filled Josie's eyes as she looked down at this man, who had rescued her in more ways than one, not as a helpless damsel, but as a partner who believed in her strength. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Garrett Foster, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Josie felt the last shadows of her past receding. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility. They were married in June in the small church in Hartville. The entire community turned out for the occasion, Josie's students and their families, neighboring ranchers, townsfolk who had come to respect both the schoolteacher and the quiet rancher who had found each other against all odds. Eleanor served as matron of honor, while Ramon stood proudly as Garrett's best man. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, two people pledging their lives to each other with full knowledge of the challenges they had overcome to reach this point. I take you, Josephine, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Garrett vowed, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. When Josie repeated the vows, her voice clear and unwavering, she felt the final pieces of her broken past knitting together. She was no longer defined by what had happened to her, but by the choices she had made since to heal, to trust again, to love. The celebration afterward at the ranch was joyful, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. As evening fell, Garrett and Josie slipped away to the porch for a moment of quiet together. Happy, Mrs. Foster? Garrett asked, his arms encircling her waist as they looked out at the stars. More than I ever thought possible, Josie replied, leaning back against his chest. And you? I have everything I could ever want right here, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. A home, a purpose, and most importantly, you. Later that night, when they were finally alone, Josie faced the moment she had both anticipated and feared, their first night as husband and wife. Garrett, understanding her unspoken anxiety, approached her with infinite patience. We have all the time in the world, Josie, he said softly. There's no rush, no expectations, just us finding our way together. His consideration brought tears to her eyes. I want this, she assured him. I want you, it's just different, he finished for her. I know, and it should be. He took her hand, raising it to his lips. Tonight and always, you set the pace. With tender care, they discovered each other, building a physical relationship as respectful and equal as their emotional one. Garrett's touch was healing, his love transforming what had once been a source of shame into an expression of genuine connection. In the morning light, as Josie woke in her husband's arms, she felt a sense of peace she had thought forever lost to her. They had both been wounded by life, both carried scars, but together they had found a way to build something beautiful from the broken pieces. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Josie continued teaching, becoming a beloved fixture in the community, and mentoring other young women who wished to pursue education. Garrett expanded the ranch, his business sense and hard work resulting in growing prosperity. In their second year of marriage, they welcomed a son, William Garrett Foster, born on a snowy February night. 2 years later, their daughter Caroline Eleanor joined the family, named for the sister Garrett had lost and the cousin who had become like family. The children grew strong and happy in the freedom of ranch life, surrounded by love and taught by example the values of honor, compassion, and resilience that had brought their parents together. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Garrett surprised Josie with news that Maxwell Pierce had finally faced justice. He had been arrested in San Francisco for fraud and was serving time in prison. "How did you find out?" Josie asked, the name bringing back only the faintest echo of old fear. "I've kept tabs on him," Garrett admitted. "Not out of vengeance, but to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he hurt you and Caroline." Josie nodded, understanding. "Does it bring you peace, knowing he's finally paying for what he did?" Garrett considered the question carefully. "Justice matters," he said finally, "but my peace came long before this news." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed there 5 years earlier. "My peace came the day you agreed to share your life with mine." As their children grew, so did the ranch and their place in the community. Garrett served on the town council, helping guide Hartville's development as the territory moved toward statehood. Josie eventually became headmistress of the school, which grew from 1 room to 3 to accommodate the expanding population. They faced hardships, 2 drought years that threatened the cattle, a fire that destroyed part of the barn, the loss of a leaner to pneumonia 1 harsh winter. Through it all, they stood together, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. On the night of their 20th wedding anniversary, they returned to their special overlook, now accompanied by their teenage children and the extended family of ranch hands and friends who had become part of their lives. As the sun set over the valley that had witnessed their journey from broken strangers to beloved partners, Garrett pulled Josie close. "You ever think about that night at the Scarlet Rose?" he asked quietly for her ears alone. "The night I found you." Josie leaned into his embrace, watching their children laughing with Ramon's grandchildren nearby. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with pain anymore, but with gratitude. If you hadn't walked through that door, I'd still be hunting ghosts," Garrett finished, "instead of living this miraculous life." "We saved each other," Josie said simply, turning in his arms to meet his gaze still as blue, still as kind as the day he had first looked at her with respect rather than desire. "Every day, you still do," Garrett replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown from the beginning, but now deepened by the shared history of a life built together. As twilight gathered around them, Josie Foster looked out over the land that had become truly home, at the family that had healed her heart, and at the man who had shown her that freedom wasn't just about escaping chains, but about choosing love again and again, when it would have been easier to remain alone. In the distance, their children called them to join the celebration. Hand in hand, Garrett and Josie walked toward the future they had created, not perfect, not without scars, but rich with the kind of love that transforms wounds into wisdom and strangers into family. And in the end, Josie reflected, that was the greatest freedom of all.